Okay, perfect.
All
That
right.
sounds good.
I'll-
So thanks everyone for joining us today. This is, as maybe you know, this is part of a MWEE Practitioner Webinar Series that we host here in the Chesapeake region. We usually host one of these every month or so in all seasons besides the summer. And really through this, we hope to provide an opportunity for practitioners to evolve their practice around environmental education, specifically within the confines of the meaningful watershed educational experience. And this series is hosted by the Chesapeake Bay Program in partnership with NOAA Chesapeake Bay Office. I think I know a lot of you on the call, but I do see some new faces as well. My name's Elise. I coordinate the BWET program here in Chesapeake. On the call, we also have a few of our other environmental literacy family on here, Bart Merrick, Krista Hogan, possibly Shannon and Andrew are also on here as well. Lots of people today. So you'll hear from them later in the presentation. And I know everybody's probably been on 5 webinars or Zoom meetings already today, but just to go over some basic etiquette, everybody is on mute right now, and we hope to keep that the case as we're going through the presentation at the beginning. We have some content delivery, and then we're going to have a chance to break out into breakout rooms. And for those of you who are on our last webinar, we're actually going to do the breakout rooms today. It didn't happen last time, but it will this time. So just kind of stay tuned with us for the first little bit where you won't be on, you won't be, able to communicate auditorily, but feel free as questions pop up to type those right into the chat box. We'll either address those as we go or at the end of the presentation. So please do feel free to contribute in the chat box. Feel free to turn your video off at this point. Zoom has been experiencing some bandwidth challenges just given everybody being on these platforms right now. So if you'd like to turn your video off, that's sometimes helpful for everyone. When we get into the breakout groups, we will ask that you turn your video on. It's kind of a best practice for inspiring some conversation. So at that point, we will ask you to turn your video back on. Let's see, when we do get into the breakouts, you can unmute yourself as well by just clicking on your microphone button. If you're on the phone, you're gonna wanna dial *6 to be able to talk. Feel free to also use that chat. And lastly, the webinar is being recorded, so if you are scrambling to take notes during this, don't feel like you need to do that. You'll be able to review this again or pass it on to colleagues. We have a Google folder that is available to everyone, and if you don't already have access to that, you just have to click the request access button. It's right in the email that was sent out earlier today. Let's see, Bart, do you want to flick to the next slide for me? Thank you. So like I said, this is part of a webinar series. We've hosted probably 10 of them in the past. We have a couple of upcoming webinars. The ones on the left-hand side are probably ones you've already seen. These are really forwarding that practice around MWEEs. The ones on the right are new ones that we've added in the past couple of weeks. Specifically just, the time being that it is now, a lot of folks are finding themselves, especially non-formal educators, with a little bit of extra time to dig into different concepts. So we're providing these kind of science-focused webinars that will support, more understanding around some of these really interesting topics. So we highly encourage you to stay tuned and check these out. One thing to note is that we have removed all of the Zoom links off of the webinars that are coming up. We are going to be changing to a new platform, so just stay tuned for an email with links to those webinars. Bart, will you flip for me? We have multiple hosts going on today. So now to get towards our official programming. So I'm going to make an assumption here that everybody has a pretty solid understanding of what MWEEs are already. But I'll be brief and just kind of do a glossy overview just in case we have some newer folks on the call today. So MWEEs are learner-centered experiences. They focus on and I'm sorry, I'm gonna actually turn my video off because I'm getting a message about low bandwidth. So MWEEs are learner-centered experiences that focus on investigations into local issues. Usually there's a driving question that guides the inquiry, students co-develop supporting questions, and they lead to authentic investigations that happen both in the classroom and outside. During this process, students synthesize that information and the data that they collect, and ultimately they decide on an action that they can address the particular issue with. And they follow through with that idea by actually taking the action and evaluating how successful it was. So this is something that's probably super familiar to you all. I hope that it is. And in the graphic on the last page, you can see that there are those kind of 4 essential elements that kind of describe what students do. Bart, no need to go back, or you can. So these are those 4 essential elements. And we've learned, you can flip to the next slide now. We learned over the years that some of these elements or parts of the MWEE are maybe more or less challenging for educators to support their students in engaging in. And I'm sure right now you can probably pinpoint a couple that are maybe easier or harder based on your own experience. And we're going to dig into that in a little bit. But oftentimes we talk about MWEEs as an approach for project-based learning that includes an outdoor field experience, or at least one outdoor field experience, and ends in action. And there are so many amazing teachers out there that are doing this sort of work, this sort of project-based learning experience in their classroom. But a lot of the work that we fund here at the NOAA Chesapeake Bay Office and others like the Chesapeake Bay Trust really aims to make MWEE systemic so that it reaches every single student in a given grade band. And we know that professional development is a highly effective way of training all teachers to teach in this sort of way that puts students in the driver's seat. So to meet the challenges that maybe you were thinking about just a slide ago, we need to provide effective PD that engages teachers and educators in all aspects of the MWEE. And so the tool that we're showcasing today, the Facilitator's Guide to the MWEE, aims to really do that. Bart, you want to flip to the next slide for me? So before we dig in, we want to know from you what you found to be the typical kind of length for MWEE professional development. So this could be one that you host yourself. This could be one that you've attended, but think about how long that typically is, what it kind of looks like. And we just launched a poll here, so feel free to select that. It's a multiple choice question, so if there's more than one that's particularly resonating with you, feel free to click on that. So I'll give folks just a couple seconds here.
Elise, how do we access the poll?
Are other folks seeing the poll? Nope. Apparently not.
Elise, do you want me to launch it, or do you?
It says that it's launched on my end, but
Okay.
if you want to try, that would be great.
All right, let's do that. Can people see it now?
No.
Okay.
All right, so poll isn't working. So maybe in the chat instead, if folks want to maybe call out, the options were, is it typically less than 1 day? Is it usually a 1-day PD? Is it a multiple day PD? Or is it consecutive? So is it like a 5-day long teacher training in the summertime? Or is it a 3-day? Or is it maybe 3 meetings over the course of a whole summer? And we'll try to track this. So I'm seeing a lot of multi-day, 3 to 5 day, 1 to 2, consecutive in the summertime, multi-day. For an ambassador training, anywhere from 6 hours to a multiple day, plus an online component. Thanks, Tammy, for calling that out. Yeah, online can be a really effective way of supporting professional development. So I'm seeing mostly multi-day in through here, which is really great to hear. I think that MWEEs are really complex, and there's a lot to support, both in terms of the kind of approach as well as the content that we want to be delivering. So that really resonates with what I think is supportive of MWEEs. And then the next question on the next page is supposed to be a chat question. And Cassie's, I think, starting to dig into that a little bit. So what are the most important components of the professional development that you offer? Or if you haven't offered PD around MWEEs, maybe that you've participated in. So feel free to type that right into the chat. Cassie says, allowing time between sessions gives folks time to reflect on what they've learned and come back with questions. I think she's speaking from some experience with the Making the Link project, which is fantastic. Content coupled with field experience, modeling with examples of full MWEEs, connections to organizations, so things that are practical, mocking the field experience of what students will do. Yeah, Nat, connecting to state SOLs in the MWEE curriculums. SOLs are science standards of learning in Virginia, but also next generation science standards in other states. Time for teachers to connect with each other. Sharing and networking. That's something that we tend to see pop up a lot in our or our educator evaluations, is like that, having that time to network and learn about each other's practice is really important. Wow, there's a lot of information here. I hope you'll take a chance maybe just to scroll through. I'm kind of trying to just summarize some of the things here: skill building, comfort in the field. So a lot of really great things. I would agree with everything in here: curriculum integration and modeling, running through the entire MWEE. So all of this I think is really applicable. And Bart, if you want to flip to the next slide for me. So like I said, this is fantastic to hear. When we set out to create this resource, the Facilitator's Guide to the MWEE, our goal was really to develop something that would be useful and that could kind of slip in rather seamlessly into the professional development that practitioners like yourself are already doing. And based on kind of all the comments that I'm seeing here, I think that that's the case. So we're gonna kind of walk you through the outline of the Facilitator's Guide, and then Bart and Krista are going to dig into some of the content that you can find in there. Another kind of goal with this resource is to support some sort of consistency in professional development across the region. There are so many organizations, I see a lot of them represented here, that are offering just amazing professional development. And we wanted to create a structure that showcased some of these elements while also making sure that we meet those gaps that have been defined year after year as we fund different efforts towards implementation of MWEEs. So just a quick nod to where kind of this product came from, just so you know why it's Maryland focused right now and where it's going. So this was an initiative out of the Maryland Project Green Classrooms Professional Development Work Group. It was initially kind of spearheaded by Donna Bellato, who's she was the state science coordinator for MSDE. And we had a team of 10 to 15 folks who really worked tirelessly on this guide. I see some of them on here today. And we got ample feedback from science supervisors, and we've piloted different aspects of this work in our training. So I think that it's, this is very much a living resource. It's something that we hope to continue to build on in the future. But right now it's in its draft form, and you can expect to see it in more of a solid form in the coming months. And those of you who were at the Environmental Literacy Forum this winter, also that we're working in each of the states to roll out a state-specific version. So right now we have a great team in Virginia that's working to really dig into this, and there are conversations happening in DC, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Delaware, that will also be kind of working towards developing and really just taking this model and modifying it for the states. So that's going to include pertinent standards, issues, resources, case studies, all of that good stuff. So Bart, if you want to flip to the next one for me. I know a lot of you guys were requesting access to this today, so probably you've already maybe taken a peek at it, and I just got like 20 more emails requesting access, so coming soon if you haven't checked it out yet. This is a 60-page document. It's not that intimidating, I promise. It's modular in design. So the goal for it is really that you can pick and choose activities that best serve your need. There's a table of contents that's linkable, so it can take you down to each of the sections. Everything in there has a time estimate so that you can quickly reference whether or not it will fit into your existing PD framework. If you were to use this entire guide and really follow that full trajectory, you would see that it's probably about a 5-day training. And that kind of jives with what we saw. I saw lots of multi-day trainings that people were saying Whether or not it's consecutive doesn't really matter so much, but there is a lot to MWEEs, and we really tried to put in the pieces that were most important, that really made sure that the things that were coming out of this were really stuck to the model of the MWEE. But that being said, we don't expect that everybody's going to do a 5-day training. You could plug these into a half day or anything like that. The guide does build sequentially on previous activities, so there are references, but it's not written in a way that would preclude you from using activities without doing the one before it necessarily. And the activities in there are super adaptable. Bart and Chris are going to talk through some of this soon, but just know that the guide, we're not trying to tell you the content. We're not trying to be the content experts by any means. Rather, we're trying to provide a framework for getting across the content that you're probably already delivering. So you're not going to find any information about like flooding in X, Y, and Z. You're going to find information about how to engage teachers in supporting their students in supporting questions about driving flooding or about flooding. So that's kind of the gist of what the design is like. You can flip for me, Bart. So this is just really quickly the kind of conceptual framework. So this is what you'll see in each part. In each part, it's kind of like a different chapter, I would say. They're basically the headings that you can kind of expect to see. And I'm going to dig into each of these 5 kind of briefly. So on the next slide, we'll see background. This is kind of the primer on the content that the facilitator can draw on. So you may or may not actually need this, but I would say that there is a lot of good information in here, and the example that's on this page is some information on why it's important to introduce action early. And this was informed by some, research that was done by Earth Force, actually through a capacity building grant. So this is oftentimes drawing on scholarship or best practices. And this is something that maybe is good for the facilitator to know in and of themselves. And it might also be something that they share with the teachers or educators that are part of their professional development. The next section, thank you, is model it. So this is where participants get into the student seat. So I saw a lot of people mentioning modeling and how important that is in professional development. So this is where teachers actually go through the inquiry themselves. They are actually practicing what an outdoor field experience looks like. I know a lot of professional development already incorporates things like that, how to use tools and equipment in the field. So really going through that process of what that looks like, but not just for the outdoor field experience, but also for the action component as well, which is maybe something that maybe gets left off more often than not. So we do have a component in there where we have teachers and educators move through the process of selecting and identifying action. Within the Model It section, there are also engagement questions that have teachers consider how they can apply their experiences into their own classroom. And we know that this is also oftentimes a really transformational experience. So engaging in that process of outdoor field experiences and feeling, totally stumped about like how to approach something, it's an enlightening experience oftentimes and translates well into actual application. This is the space in the Model It where we can really imagine folks integrating their content, their subject area, their resources, all of the special things that you have in your programs already. In these sections in the Facilitator's Guide now, there's already a lot of Maryland resources that are inserted in there, but know that this is like really adaptable. So if you have ones that are more local or pertinent to your context or geography, this is like the place in your training where that might be particularly well suited. The next section is the example. So this is a local example of a MWEE. So right now, being the Maryland Facilitators Guide that you all have access to, you'll see that there's an example from Shore Rivers, which is actually an elementary school example. And this is something we hear over and over and over again, the need for examples, case studies. People want to see what these tools look like. So in this guide, you'll see that we have all of the MWEE toolbox worksheets completed. The environmental literacy model pages are completed. I see Suzanne on here now with us. They did a fantastic job of working with Talbot and Dorchester County Public Schools to really build this out and to make sure that it's standard aligned. And this is just a really good example that can provide kind of a reference for the level of detail and how others have approached MWEEs. We don't have a video of them yet, but perhaps that's coming in the future. So that's that. In the guides that are forthcoming in the other states, you can expect to see state level examples. So in the Virginia guide, we're working on a few of those right now. The long-term goal is to have an example at elementary, middle, and high school for each state. So if this is something that interests you and you want to potentially be featured in that, like, definitely reach out. We're always looking for great examples. Hey, Suzanne. Some of the sections have additional resources. I wouldn't say that every single section does, but these are really extension activities. And you can use them really on an as needed basis. They are really extensions around different concepts that we think may or may not be kind of easily, that people may or may not already be familiar with. So the example here is using claim evidence reasoning, which is a really great way of connecting issue investigation to the action component. So there's a fun activity in there that's kind of an extra, and this isn't counted in the total time that we expect the facilitator's guide to be really implemented in, but it's really just an additional resource. And finally, the last kind of component that you can see in each of the parts is Plan It. So this is really where teachers and educators apply what they've learned, and they begin to reflect on how they can translate that into the classroom. I saw a lot of people chatting that the application and the time for planning, it's definitely a really important part of professional learning. So we want to make sure that we give ample planning time so that when teachers leave, they have that kind of product or resource or reference to be able to then implement it in their classroom. So if they're, this is where teachers will be filling out the ELM or other planning worksheets. And if there is an existing MWEE in the district already, then this is perhaps where teachers are fine-tuning how it applies to their classroom, and they're able to dig into some of the nuances of the implementation. We can go on to the next one now, Bart. Yeah, and then the other resources that are included in the facilitator's guide, there's a slide deck, which is really just a starter. They are for you to use or to not use as much as you see fit during your professional development. There's it really just kind of follows the each part of the facilitator's guide. You can take aspects of it. When you see it in the Google Drive, we ask that you make your own copy, of course, so that we're not editing the copy that is accessible to everyone. But it's really just a way for you to kind of start utilizing some of the resources that are in the guide. Also inside of the folder, there's all of the resources, all of the worksheets for all of the activities are also in there. So for those of you who were at the Environmental Literacy Forum, you probably remember that activity where we have the cards and the Bay Program issues and the values and things like that. Those are all in there, and they're already in a format where you can just put them in your computer, print them, and then cut them right up. So it's really easy. And like I said, all of this lives in a Google folder right now. Let me know if you need access to it. We're happy to provide that. Eventually, the hope is to get this content into a more accessible platform like Bay Backpack. But I'd say that's forthcoming towards the end of this year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bart.
Cool. Do you want to try to see if this poll question works, or just move it on?
Yeah, let's try it.
All right, give it a shot.
All right.
So I just launched it. You should see it on your screen and be able to click on something.
Oh, yay. Jenny says we can see it. Perfect.
Hey.
So the question is, what parts of the MWEE do you and your audience need most practice with? So think back to maybe the beginning of the webinar when you were thinking about what are the biggest challenges. We'll give people 10 more seconds to input their information into the poll.
And I think when I end poll, it's going to show everybody the results. So ending it in 5 seconds. Looks like the activity is pretty much wrapped up too. All right, so it looks like designing action projects connected to investigations seems to be our winner, which is something that we've heard in the past too. But just looking at the results, there's a couple, kind of other ones that have bubbled up as being pretty significant in terms of questions, driving and supporting, implementing action projects, and supporting youth voice. It's very cool to see that, and thank you. And if you can't see that poll, sorry, and this is one of those things that should be recorded in the overall webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and move on to the next piece. So, so the hope now is based on what you've heard about the overall framework for the Facilitator's Guide. Chris and I are going to dig in a little bit more to actually what it looks like, and kind of try and describe some of that for you. So you have a sense of what you're getting into if you go ahead and take a look at the documents that Elise is sharing with y'all. One key thing before we dig too far into that, you heard Elise mention the ELM, or the environmental literacy model. And you heard Elise also mention that Shore Rivers is one of the model MWEEs that we present through the Facilitator's Guide, and we use their ELM to do this. But I guess the point I wanted to make is, if you're not entirely familiar with the environmental literacy model, what it is it's a resource or a tool for planning and describing your MWEE and what it looks like, what kind of activities are part of it, how it connects to standards. But the bottom line is to take the MWEE and put it in place, both in the local context of the environment you're working in and the school context where you're working. The ELM was actually developed a few years back by a group of partners working on this thing called the Maryland Environmental Literacy Partnership. Chesapeake Bay Foundation was one of the lead partners putting that together. So I just wanted to highlight what the ELM is really quickly before digging into the Facilitator's Guide. So like in this slide, I'm just trying to call out that there are 5 key parts of the Facilitator's Guide, beginning with framing the MWEE and ending with auditing the MWEE. But in each one of these parts, like Elise described, there are resources to support the implementation of that component, and each component has the elements and the framework elements that Elise described earlier, from background on that topic to looking at a MWEE within the context of the workshop, an example MWEE like Shore Rivers, and then digging some resources and providing time to work on your MWEE as well. So the first part of the entire Facilitator's Guide is really all about framing the MWEE. And this one is one of those parts that's really important background learning. It might not be the most interesting to everybody on the planet, but I personally love it. And this is the part that sets the context for the overall meaningful watershed education experience. And one of the key things we're trying to do in this framing the MWEE part, though, is reflect on the MWEE 101 course. So online, and we'll put these links, and these links are in the Facilitator's Guide, and we can add them elsewhere or put them in the chat, but we have an online course called MWEE 101. And basically, that course is meant to describe what the meaningful watershed education experience is, and kind of outline all the essential elements and supporting practices. Elise kind of went into that, at one of those first slides that we looked at. But this entire Facilitator's Guide assumes that people that are going through this process have gone through that MWEE 101 process already. So that's an important thing to note. But once we have that all established and set up, we try to set the context through this framing part of the Facilitator's Guide to highlight where this whole thing comes from. And part of that is describing the context of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, which is that agreement that guides the conservation and protection of the Chesapeake Bay, and establishes the meaningful watershed education experience itself amongst the states within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And that's part of what frames the MWEE and part of drives it. But there's also a lot of stuff happening on the state level. And that could be a state level environmental literacy plan like the District of Columbia has, or the science standards like those in Virginia, the next generation science standards in Maryland and Delaware. Or it could be a set of environmental literacy standards like Maryland has. But the point being, no matter where you are, what state, wherever you are, the MWEE needs to be anchored firmly within the curricular and kind of policy landscape. And that's sort of a helpful thing to consider. And then the last piece is, I mentioned briefly, the environmental literacy plans. And in some local education agencies around the watershed, there are environmental literacy plans that kind of outline the scope and sequence of environmental literacy work throughout a student's career. And if you think about in Maryland, where you're trying to graduate environmental literate students, that's sort of like the plan for getting there. And that environmental literacy plan is one of those key, really key framing elements in the overall meaningful watershed education experience. So if you're doing a training on MWEEs and you're using the Facilitator's Guide, the suggestion is that you also kind of try and track down your local environmental literacy plan, if you have one. And if you don't, have a conversation about what would be important in that context. But the bottom line is a shared understanding of what the MWEE is and how it connects to both state, regional, and local education and environmental policy. So that's all within the framing the MWEE part. And that's the first part of the Facilitator's Guide. The second part is the curriculum anchor. And you heard me mention this just a second ago. You heard Elise talk a little bit about it. But it's essential that meaningful watershed education experiences are supportive of what students really are doing in terms of the learning they're involved in the school. So that tie to the curriculum is essential. And this section of the Facilitator's Guide goes through a number of activities meant to kind of draw out the connection between environmental issues and the curriculum that exists in these different counties. And that starts off with an activity that looks like, that has participants exploring local issues. We actually use the Chesapeake Bay Program's website, and they list all kinds of really cool issues like you see on the screen, like agriculture, air pollution, and crabs, and says, take a look at these issues, try and understand a little bit about them, think about how they might apply in your local context, and then connect them to some important things like natural systems, like what natural systems are influenced by agricultural systems, what human systems are, or what value systems play in, because it's the intersection of that natural, human, and value systems that really kind of drives some of the really cool and interesting parts of the issues that you explore throughout the meaningful watershed education experience. And it's really that, you know, some of the tensions amongst those systems that drive some of the issues in the engagement piece. The curriculum anchor part also explores the opportunity to take those issues and how do you develop a driving question using issues. And this is where we set up that workshop MWEE. So within a workshop that supports or is kind of supported by the Facilitator's Guide, the idea is that you have a workshop MWEE that you're tracking throughout the entire process. And ideally, you're developing and sharing that driving question through here. And then immediately, though, turning to what is the participant's agency in terms of looking at that issue. And if you think about it from like a training perspective, that might be the teachers or educators you're working with. But as a teacher, that's the students you're working with. So the idea is to provide some support in the Facilitator's Guide to how do you develop supporting questions? And how do you connect those supporting or investigative questions to standards? Kind of what kind of investigations do they support? Are they indoor investigations? Are they outdoor investigations? Is there a possibility that that those investigations can inform action? And that's one other thing that we try to do in this curriculum anchor piece, is really think about the action component, and not just the action component in terms of, can we reasonably expect that there's an issue, there's an action related to this issue that we can dig into, but can we also think about how do we engage students in taking action? And in this part of the Facilitator's Guide, we really try and highlight how important it is to think about that stewardship civic action component, and really putting and providing agency, or making sure that the students or the participants in the program have some agency related to that action. And then the last part is kind of taking a look into the model MWEE, like the Shore Rivers one, and thinking about how they're applying some of the tools available within the whole the Facilitator's Guide and the MWEE Guide itself, like developing, driving, and supporting questions, using the environmental literacy model, and then actually using the MWEE audit tool to try and explore the model MWEE to say, like, all right, so how's it doing? And then use it also as a tool for developing your own MWEE. And that's the last part of the curriculum integration section, is thinking about how do we create our own MWEEs and what's part of that. And one of the important things here is that it doesn't need to be always an original MWEE. It certainly can be, but it can also be an exploration of an existing MWEE within your county if they already have one. You're a local education agency. So that's the first two parts of the Facilitator's Guide. So I'm going to turn it over to Krista for the next couple.
Yep. So hello, everyone. I'll take you through the rest of the guide. So the next part is all about issue investigation. So this will take you from questions into the investigations themselves. So like Bart mentioned, you should be incorporating student voice throughout the MWEE. So that will be involved when they're starting to think about their supporting questions that are supporting the overall driving question. So a big chunk of this is thinking about how you're going to get all of your students' voices heard. So the part starts with a discussion on where do you currently have student voice and choice in your programming? What are some great methods for incorporating this, and where might it make sense in the MWEE? So that's really more of a discussion. And then the big part of the issue investigation is having your participants, the teachers that are in your PD, put on their student hat and going outside. Because we know a lot of people need a little practice with how to conduct investigations outdoors. If you're working with informal educators, they seem to be pretty experienced, but especially if you're thinking about doing a professional development with classroom teachers, a lot of times they really appreciate the extra practice on how to work with their students outside. So in that student role, your participants will think about the supporting questions, and they'll actually design investigations. And then you hopefully will be able to take them outside. Maybe your PD can go to a nature center that they'll be going with their students, or maybe it's just on the school grounds or wherever they can go, just outside. And they're going through these investigations, and then they're coming back in and starting to synthesize their data and starting to form some conclusions. And then putting their educator hat back on, they think about, how well did that go? What improvements could I have made? What safety precautions should I be aware of when we're doing this with our students themselves? And if needed, the final activity in issue investigation is how you could be looking at your local area and think about some great outdoor partners to be using. So there's just a few resources that are available, like Bay Backpack, to start looking at some of those partners. And then move on to the last part, the stewardship and civic action part. So this last section will finish out the ELM for your participants. They'll be working on the final section of that. So they're taking their investigations from the issue investigation, and they're starting to make claims by using the Claim Evidence Reasoning, or CER tool. So as mentioned, I think at the very beginning, this is all about having evidence-based action projects. So they'll take the evidence they collected outside or maybe in the classroom. They'll make claims that support or answer the supporting questions and the driving questions. And then they use those claims to start coming up with some action ideas. And then we get into another part that I think was also highlighted in our initial poll, is how to incorporate student voice, especially when you're starting to think about action projects and moving from action project ideas into implementation. So there's a number of activities in this part that have participants practice different democratic activities that could get all students involved in thinking about action and finally making the decision, and then working together to make a plan for that action, and then finally implementing the action itself. And at the end of this part, they'll be completing their ELM and then moving on to the final section. Let's see, Bart. There we go. The final section of the guide is auditing your MWEE. So really this is just everyone coming together with their individual ELMs that they've created through this process. Or again, maybe you already have an ELM and you're just working on refining it, and you're using the audit tool that's in the hard copy of that MWEE guide, also found on Bay Backpack. and you're using it to critique your ELM or your MWEE plan. And ideally, if this is a situation where everyone has their own individual MWEE plan or ideas, you'd also use this time to share out so everyone can hear what others are thinking, maybe give some feedback, and then also just exchange your ELMs too, so people get practice using the audit tool on other ELMs. And so that kind of wraps up the guide itself. And again, whether you use the guide as a whole and you take it for those whole 5 days, or you just pick out the little pieces that you need most practice with, the ultimate goal is that at the end, everyone feels really comfortable with the MWEE framework, its goals, and then all the tools that are provided in the MWEE guide.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Krista. So that's an overview of what the Facilitators Guide has in store for you. We want to take this time now to do a little bit of discussion. So we're going to break out into breakout rooms in just a moment here. If you haven't used them before, essentially what's going to happen is we're going to assign you into different groups. And you will be prompted to click a button that says join a group, or you will be automatically transported if you do not click that. And you'll be in a group with about maybe 10 other people or so, maybe a little bit less than that. And we hope that you'll discuss the following questions. What does professional development look like that you have lined up for the summer or fall? And we fully acknowledge that everything's a little up in the air right now for summer and fall. So don't let that challenge you at all. Just what do you have planned right now? And then how can you imagine incorporating either parts of the Facilitator's Guide, which ones resonated with you the most, and what could that potentially look like in terms of your existing workshops and programming? And then lastly, what sorts of outstanding needs or questions do you have? That's something that we'll come back together and chat about as a group. So definitely come up with a couple of those questions if you can. And when we get into the breakout rooms, you will be able to turn your video back on, and you should be able to click your microphone to turn your audio back on. We hope that everybody will use their video and audio. This is kind of like a best practice around breakout rooms. This is a good way just to encourage sharing across. We have a couple of different BWET regions actually represented here today, which is really cool. Also seeing folks from across the Chesapeake Bay Watershed, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia. So we're excited to do a little bit of sharing here. So in just a second, you're going to see the breakout room open up. So now you should be able to click right into your breakout room, or you'll be transported there. As we're waiting for the last couple folks to get back, if you have any outstanding questions or kind of epiphanies that came up during your group chats, feel free to type them into the chat now. We'll wrap up here in just a couple of minutes. And my dog's barking.
Yeah, so feel free to put those into the chat, kind of any of those epiphanies, and then we'll try and we'll try and kind of see what we hear there as well.
So I think that everybody who's still on is probably back at this point. So if you have any outstanding questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Elizabeth is wondering how they can get the MWEE Facilitators Guide. If you don't already have access to it, you can just send me an email right after this. I think some of the folks that maybe got this email from their other BWET coordinators in different regions maybe don't have that same email that I'd sent out. So I just popped it into the chat. It's elise.trelligan@noaa.gov. And we can certainly share that with you. Can we get hard copies of the Educator's Guide for Professional Development? The Educator's Guide is the companion guide, which is like the original MWEE guide, as we call it. If you need copies of that, the best way to reach out would probably be to shoot us an email. There might be a way to order some depending on how many you need. Or if you just need a couple, we could probably send those along. But just know that the guide is available online at Bay Backpack, and teachers find it really helpful to be able to use it, online and be able to use the fillable tools and things like that. Hey Bart, do you mind or Krista, does somebody mind taking over the chat, because somebody's at my house, I think.
Yeah, totally can.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. so one of the things that we heard in the group that I was with was, you know, these webinars are great, but like thinking about how to localize them more too, and maybe there's some groups locally that are helpful that we could set up conversations with to maybe come up with some more local versions. I think that is also an option. And again, reaching out to Elise or myself or Krista on that, we'd be happy to chat about that and see what we can do. And then I like this, you know, a lot. A couple things are coming up about the, you know, the current challenges due to this health crisis, right? And what does it look like from switching field-based professional learning to online formats? And what kind of supports are out there and things along those lines. That's something that I think a couple of us might have heard in our smaller group sessions. And definitely we took notes on that to say that maybe there's an opportunity to provide some guidance there. I would say we're all learning this as we go. So if people have stuff to share, you know, maybe if you don't mind reaching out and letting us know that you do. And then maybe some of that stuff could turn into a webinar down the road. I see another one. Our big question is, how do we facilitate PD training for outdoor learning experiences, field trips for the teachers we are trying to train online? Yeah, so again, same sort of things. Not easy, but send some ideas our way. We'd love to see it.
Bart, I saw a few questions about getting teachers comfortable with, I guess this last one, with allowing student voice and choice. So some of the activities in the guide we hope can help that. So again, putting the teachers in the student seats and going through the process so they can see what it feels like for them. And then also to then think through the possible problems they might have and kind of address some of those issues. And then as for the point of choosing an action project, and I'm sure we've all heard action projects that are massively unattainable that students come up with and are really excited, but incorporating them and involving them in the decision-making by saying, these are our restrictions. We have only X number of class days, X amount of money, and then at least they'll be a part of the process and they'll understand maybe why their action can't be chosen.
Yeah, and the Facilitators Guide has a lot of helpful resources there. And then, you know, we also mentioned earlier the Earth Force and their kind of decision-making process was part of what went into this whole thing. And, you know, I would encourage people to check out the Earth Force website and the Earth Force process to support some of that. How do you support teachers being comfortable letting go? And I'll just piggyback a little bit on what Krista had to say too, in terms of, you know, when you're in a professional learning opportunity like something using this Facilitators Guide thing, you know, that gets you a chance to be in the student seat a little bit too. And that's part of the intention of it, is what does it feel like and how can you structure things to have participant voices heard? So I think the comments are winding down a little bit. So I'm gonna change the slides just to say, first and foremost, because I think we're just about wrapped up. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We appreciate the time that you've dedicated to this, and we have a number of other workshops coming up, but if you wanted to screenshot or take a picture, this is our contact information and the link to the Facilitators Guide, so you can go ahead and access that. And then one more reminder is that over the rest of the spring, we have a few more of these webinars that we do have scheduled. So if you wanted to screenshot that or QR code it or copy down that link, please do, because we would love to see you at some of these other webinars. Some of them, again, focused on the more practice of the meaningful watershed education experience. Coming up on May 21st is about MWEEs in the after school and summer context. What might that look like? On May 12th, we're going to be focusing on the connection between climate resilience and MWEEs. And then we have a number of science sessions coming up in April and May, looking at everything from satellite data and how to use it to oyster restoration, and how you might learn a little bit about oyster restoration here, and then wrapping it up right now with climate trends in the Chesapeake Bay on May 28th. So please take a look at those. Consider joining us if you have the time. And we got a couple other ideas throughout this webinar for future webinars that we might consider putting out there. So we thank you also for those. So with that, I like it how Meredith puts it: stay safe, wash your hands, wear your masks, and stay strong to MWEE peeps. I couldn't have said it better. So Meredith, thank you for that. And with that, I think we'll hang on. Krista and I will hang on here for a few minutes in case there's any questions that pop up. But otherwise, thank you for your time, and we'll talk to and or see you soon. Be well.
Thanks, guys. Be well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.